This is Dharma Drops with your host, Rebecca Warfield. This podcast is a little bit about yoga, a little bit about life, and a little bit about whatever. And just as a warning, this podcast is unscripted, so that means I might regret a few things that I say. But hey, maybe I'll say some pretty awesome stuff too. Remember, these are musings, not truths. Buckle up, giddy up, because here we go. Hey Dharma Drops listeners, it's me, your host of Dharma Drops podcast, Rebecca Warfield, and I am here maybe with a little echo because I'm in an empty room with your Dharma Mini Drop episode for July 1st, 2020. Happy July, friends. This episode is coming out a few hours late because life is fucking crazy, and I made the mistake, I think 2 weeks ago, of saying that I've never been late or missed an episode, and now life is total chaos and I am actually late for this episode. But most of you probably already know that I've been moving, and I had a little bit of moving dramas, just normal moving things, and I wasn't able to get into my new home office until this morning to actually start recording. So here I am, a little bit late, but we are here. Now, with that said, sorry about the echo if you can hear one, because I am in the new Dharma Drops office space in my new home, but there's nothing in it other than an empty desk, a chair, and my laptop. So we're doing the best we can, and hopefully over the next few episodes, things will be settled and we'll be back to our regular, normal show quality. But in any case, I'm glad to be here, even though I am a little bit late getting you your podcast episode. But hey, this year, I feel like if there's any time in our lives where there's a little bit of forgiveness for disorganization, forgetfulness, that sort of stuff, it's right now, because life is so crazy. And I feel like that's all I've said on the podcast since I don't know, when the pandemic started, March. But for me, I feel like it's just starting to get really freaking crazy. In the beginning of the pandemic, I remember seeing some meme that said, it's not business as usual, it's business as best as we can. And I also started seeing these things about like, hey, it's okay if all you want to do is sit on the couch. And for me, at that time, I didn't really feel that. I was like, all right, this thing is happening. Let's just plow forward and just do everything that we can to adapt. And then flash forward now to July, and I actually feel like the effects of all that's transpired in 2020 are just really starting to affect my emotional well-being. It took a little while to get here, but I think a lot of people have been experiencing this. Of course, I can't speak for everyone, but I think some people probably felt a lot of that anxiety, stress, and even exhaustion in the beginning of things. And for others, it's just now starting to really take effect. And for me, I'm in that second group where I'm just feeling it. It really hit me a few days ago. We had to go out and get some hand soap and a few things for our new house. And it was such a goddamn production to do anything, to like go into a store, to get a cart, to deal with anything was like this huge to do. And at the end of the day, no one had anything that we needed anyway. For those of you stockpiling hand soap, I need a bottle, just one. That's all I need. I just need a little soap. So please, if you're going to the store, just save one for somebody else. Don't take them all. But in any case, it really tipped me over the edge the other day with also the stress of moving. I was just over it. And so here I am this week, just feeling a lot of exhaustion, really tired and really worn out. But, I think this has sort of been building up over the last few weeks, which is where I want to take this mini drop episode today. Because even though I'm just feeling the effects, I have noticed that my desire to be on my yoga mat and to practice yoga has been dwindling over the last few weeks. And that's really what I want to focus on today in this mini drop episode, is that it is okay to fall off of your yoga mat. And I don't mean like fall off your yoga mat because you fell out of a standing balance. I've done that a million times, and you probably will too. But I really mean about falling out of your practice. When I first started practicing yoga on the reg, there was a lot of pressure to practice every day. And I do think a daily yoga practice is important, and I do think a daily yoga practice is good. But there was also this sort of unspoken, like, well, if you don't do it every day, you're not doing it right. And if you don't do it every day, you're not really being a yogi. And in some level, that never really sat well with me, because look, the first way to get me to do nothing is to tell me to do something. right? Maybe it's not the best personality trait, but it is part of who I am, unfortunately, sometimes. So if you say to me like, oh, well, to be a real yogi, you have to practice every day, my response is probably fuck off. I'm not doing anything anymore. But I have discovered the benefits of a daily yoga practice. But I think one thing that we don't talk about very often is that it is normal for even the most dedicated yogis to fall out of their practice sometimes. And I'll be honest with you, I have fallen out of my practice over the last few weeks. Part of it is because I've had a lot of things going on in my personal life, but also I just haven't felt like it. I would much rather sit on the couch and watch the Real Housewives of New Jersey reruns than be on my yoga mat. And I know that sounds kind of crazy to hear on a yoga podcast, but the truth of the matter is at some point we as yogis will arrive at this space where we just don't feel like practicing. Maybe it's because there's something emotional going on. Maybe it's because there's something happening in the body. Maybe it's just because you don't feel like it and you don't know why, but we will at some point in our practice stop practicing. So with that in mind, I want to just touch on a few points about when we feel like we don't want to practice asana or the physical practice of yoga, what can we do? Because for me, I fall into a sort of a loop or a spiral with this sometimes. So I stop practicing and then I feel like I don't know what to do. And so I do nothing and then I fall into this loop of doing nothing because I don't feel like practicing. So I do think that there is a time and a place to step back from the mat temporarily, but that doesn't mean we have to let the practice go entirely. So with that in mind, today's mini drop episode, I'm just going to share with you a few ways that we can continue the work that we've done on the yoga mat, but without actually being on the yoga mat in these times of our lives when we don't really want to practice or feel like practicing. So before I say anything else, there are probably a million ways that you practice yoga off of your yoga mat, and I will probably not touch on all of them. So I do want to hear how you practice yoga off the mat. So be sure to reach out if you have ideas that we can add into a future episode. You can hit me up on Instagram at Dharma Drops Podcast. Just send me a DM with how you practice yoga off the mat, and we can add that into a new episode moving forward. So, good. With that in mind, my friends, let me stop rambling and just go over a few ways. Number one, the thing that often helps me the most is to connect with others, because that is what the yoga practice is actually really about. On the yoga mat, we learn to connect the mind and the body and the breath together as sort of this microcosmic example of connection with all of the universe. But we don't have to be practicing asana to do that all the time. The nice thing is asana gives us the tools to be able to do that. But even if we're not practicing asana at that moment and maybe not that week or that month or however long you decide to take a break, that doesn't mean that we haven't learned the tools to connect with others. So number one, the thing that often helps me the most in the times when I fall out of my practice is to connect with others. And that doesn't mean anything super crazy. It means doing things like picking up the phone and having a conversation with a friend. In fact, I did this yesterday. I was just feeling like really worn out, tired, exhausted. My anxiety is a little bit out of the roof right now. And Aaron was like, why don't you just talk to Angela? And I was like, I don't feel like talking to anybody. Because again, the first way to get me to do nothing is to tell me to do something. But eventually I did end up talking to Angela. What up, Angela, by the way? And I really did feel better to connect on this just human level, especially during a time when we're still really distant from each other because of the coronavirus. So after a long phone conversation and talking about things that have nothing to do with yoga, I really, truly felt better. And yoga teaches us that when we connect with others, we feel better, right? And we don't feel better in a self-serving way. It just feels good to be connected with other people because that's sort of the natural human state, is to be connected. So in these times when you feel like you don't want to practice, number one, connect with someone. And maybe if there's no one you want to talk to on the phone, because I get that too. Look, sometimes I've said before that this coronavirus is keeping us all distant, and I'll see you when I see you. I really could sit in my house and see no one probably for the rest of my life because that's just who I am. So I get it. If you're like, I don't want to talk to anybody, I feel you on that. But another really great way to connect with others is to read some literature, particularly fiction. So one of the things that has really helped me in my lifetime connect with others is to read stories of other people. And in particular, fiction really filled that space for me, because that's what literature does, is it gives us the opportunity to connect with others. They might be fictional characters, but they represent the real human experience. And so literature even gives us that opportunity to have that connection. Or maybe you just journal. Journaling is a great way to connect with others because you get to say things to people that you wouldn't normally want to say or you don't want to say. I'm not saying that you have to be the social butterfly of the coronavirus pandemic, but I do believe that in these times when we're falling out of our practice and we're not really sure how to move forward, finding a way to literally or metaphorically find connection can really help us feel better. Because again, that's what the yoga practice is about. So connecting with others can be helpful. And maybe this goes in the same vein, but I also think it's helpful to consider what asana has taught you about your daily life. Because again, just because we're not practicing on our yoga mats doesn't mean that the days, weeks, months, and years that we've spent working on the mat just go away suddenly because we're not practicing. We've learned a lot and we've built a lot of resiliency and we've put a lot of tools in our little yogi toolbox that we get to use every day. And so when we're not practicing asana, this is a really important time for us to actually practice yoga. And that is really key here because asana isn't the only way to practice yoga. Yes, it makes us feel better. Yes, it helps us understand the teachings. But if you're just practicing asana, there's this whole other part of your life that's waiting for you to apply the teachings to. So when we take a moment to step away from the mat, it's a really great opportunity for us to explore what we have learned through the yogic teachings into our daily lives. And this can mean, like a lot of stuff. I don't even know where to begin with this because what we learn is so different on the mat for each person and what that means for us is so different. But this is the time to put it into action because after all, as I say all the time, yoga is skill in action. So we take what we learn on the mat and we apply it in our daily lives. And now this is a really great time for journaling or jotting down what has been the most poignant or revolutionary ideas that you have learned about yourself in the yoga practice and start applying them. Maybe it means it's taking a different approach to how you communicate. Maybe it means cleaning out your home and creating more space in a more sattvic environment. Or maybe this for you means rethinking your mindset about your career. I don't know what that means for you, but just because you're not on the yoga mat doesn't mean you're not doing yoga. In fact, yesterday in my conversation with Angela, we did talk about this for a minute, that just because you're practicing asana does not mean you're practicing yoga. So just because you're not doing asana does not mean that this isn't a time for you to practice yoga. So with that in mind, when you are thinking about how you can apply what you've learned on the mat into your life, there are other ways to practice yoga. And I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but I don't think we can be reminded of this enough. Because for those of us who enjoy the asana practice, I think it's really easy to get stuck in the need to only do asana and the asana's the way. So as we think about what we learned on the yoga mat, that can take us into new forms of study and practice because asana is not the only way to practice. There are lots of other forms of yoga out there. You can practice svadhyaya and jnana yoga, self-study, and the knowledge of yoga. This is a great opportunity to read yogic texts, to read yoga memoirs, to read yoga books, right? Anything that helps you stay inspired about the yoga practice and not just asana, about the entirety of the practice or different ways of practicing. This is a great time for you to even explore other conversations about yoga. Re-listen to Dharma Drops podcast episodes with people from the past to see how those conversations influence you now or how they affect you now or change the way you think about practicing yoga in your daily life. Or listen to other yoga podcasts, right? Listen to other conversations and ideas. And this is a time to expand the way you practice yoga, not to get yourself stuck on the mat, to expand. So reading, listening to podcasts, studying, taking in that knowledge of the teachings. This is a great opportunity for that. This is also a really good time for you to explore other types of yoga, for instance, bhakti yoga, kirtan, chanting, lots of other ways to practice yoga. In fact, for me, Even though I have not been practicing asana much lately, the one thing that I have been drawn to that I normally avoid like the plague, no pun intended, because we're in the fucking plague, but I have really been drawn to seated meditation, and I normally hate seated meditation. I know the things you hate or the things you avoid are the ones you need to do, but normally that's not my style. But I have been really drawn to seated guided meditation over the last few weeks, and that is very unlike me. But it's been really helpful, and it's sort of given me what I need to find some stasis and stability in the day to day. So this is a good time to try other practices like seated meditation, guided meditation, pranayama, breath work, these things that sometimes I feel like in the asana practice, not always, of course, but sometimes we can start to forget about because we're really wrapped up in the movement part of things. So don't be afraid to explore other ways of practicing yoga. Look, Patanjali has 8 limbs, 8 ways that we can practice yoga. And 2 of those limbs have 5 subsets. So that's a lot of ways that we can practice yoga. So if you don't even know where to start, maybe just start with going back to the basics of the yamas and the niyamas and reviewing the yamas and niyamas. For me, going back to the basics, and I know the yamas and niyamas aren't basics, it's actually very difficult work, and the 8 limb path is not just 8 things to do, right? It's a very difficult work. But going back to these quote basics of yoga helps me reset my mind about what it is I'm actually doing and giving me ways to actually do that don't require me to be on my mat when I'm not really in this space to practice asana. So there's lots of things you can do that will help you think about your yoga practice in a different way. But it's going to take a little bit of exploration and some discovery to see what works, especially if you're used to practicing in just one way. So don't be afraid to just do a little research, to go back to your favorite yoga texts or the ones that maybe you had in your yoga teacher training or something like that, and explore what it is that brought you here in the first place. Asana might have been what brought you to the yoga practice, but it wasn't the poses that did it. It was something else happening. So whatever that was that you experienced underneath of the asana practice that came forth, that's where we are trying to head right now for those of us who are maybe feeling like we don't want to practice asana. I also want to note too that sometimes rest is just what we need. In the beginning of the pandemic, I was practicing like crazy. Part of it is because I was teaching classes on Zoom and also trying to do my own yoga practice and also filming classes for the Dharma Drops Yoga on Demand site. I was practicing like crazy and it felt really good to work. Then suddenly this point came where I just couldn't do that anymore and I was too tired and I didn't feel like doing it anymore because my body was worn out. I talked about this before on a past mini drop episode. It is okay to rest. That is part of the yoga practice too. Right? There is a balance of effort and ease, sthira sukhamasanam. The connection to the earth is steady and joyous. And that sukham, that sweet, sometimes that asks us to rest and to take some time for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that, to just rest for a moment. But with that in mind, the idea of resting in our practice, that brings me to the 4th and final point for this mini episode, is that there is also a demand at some level though for rebound. I'm not saying that you have to get back on your yoga mat right now. I'm not saying you have to get back on your yoga mat ever, to be honest with you. But what I am saying is that we do have to rebound into the practice at some point. If we rest from it, if we pull away from it too far, we can get so distanced from it that it's difficult to get back. Yes, these things might be part of our lives and may have changed us forever, but it's like anything else. If you don't use it, you lose it. So there is sort of a requirement at some level in the yoga practice to rebound. And I just heard this on a podcast the other day, and now I can't remember which one it was, but they were quoting Gabby Bernstein, and she talks about the rebound rate. And I don't remember what she said verbatim, but essentially the gist of it was, it doesn't matter how many times you fall off, right? It doesn't matter how many times you fall off your yoga mat. It doesn't matter how many times you fall out of your practice. What matters is how quickly you can rebound, right? That what we learn through this work actually is the ability to come back. And that's one of the most important teachings of the yoga practice. It's like we can fall off the train 1,000 times, we can make mistakes 1,000 times, and then we have the choice. Do we stay where we fell, or do we work through all of that and come back? And so that's a really, really important part of this. I'm not saying you have to come back to asana. All right, you can do whatever you want. For those of you who maybe are falling out of your practice a little bit, like I feel like I am right now, No problem. I know I'm very confident that I will come back to my yoga practice. This is not the first time I have sort of fallen off my mat a little bit. Some people don't come back to their asana practice. But the big thing is, can we rebound in a way that serves us the best? So that means not expecting ourselves to rebound and be exactly where we were the moment we fell off, right? Every time that I have this experience where I don't feel like practicing yoga, when I come back, my practice is very different and it's forever changed. Right? Things just that, and I don't mean because I'm like out of shape and I've lost my shoulder strength. I mean, I stopped practicing for a reason. Something wasn't working. And when I come back to it, I have to ameliorate that. I have to fix that. And that's part of this. It's rebounding in a way that serves you best. So really thinking about what is it that caused you to fall off the mat or to fall out of your practice, and what do you need to be able to come back to a practice that serves you the best, which means it's not going to look the same as it did before you started to fall off the wagon, so to speak. I'm not sure. Maybe some of you out there are thinking like, God, all I really want to do is practice. It's the only thing that's keeping me sane, but I have talked to a number of people who are just feeling a little bit over it right now. And I think that we can't ask the yoga practice to look the same at every moment in our lives. 2020 has been the wildest year we have ever experienced, I think, collectively in this lifetime, which means whatever we do to stay balanced will have to change. And sometimes that means we have to take a step back and reevaluate what it is that we're doing. And I feel like if the practice doesn't evolve with not just our personal lives, but with the needs of the world, then we're probably not doing the work in the first place. The practice is not always supposed to look the same. And I think that the practice really has to take shape in different ways depending on what's happening in our personal lives and the lives of our community and in the lives of the entire world. And if we think that what worked for us during times of whatever normal was, whatever was happening last year in 2019, if whatever was working for you in 2019 isn't working for you now, you're probably pretty normal. So my guess is most of us are probably readjusting the way we think about the yoga practice right now. And for me and for a lot of other people, that also means taking a step back for a minute and reevaluating what does that mean about how we move forward with our practice. So for me, for example, one of the things I think I am going to stay a little bit more committed to is more restorative yoga. I can't balance the intensity of the world right now with the intensity of my practice, and more seated meditation. So it doesn't mean, of course, that you never do yoga again. It just means that the way in which we do yoga starts to change. And I think that's really the beauty of the practice, is that it gets to meet us where we are all of the time, but only if you ask it to meet you where you are, which requires a lot of attention, a lot of inquiry, and a lot of honesty. Okay, my friends, that's all I have for you today. It is a mini episode, and I'm trying to keep the mini episode short. Sometimes I can get a little too long-winded. You probably noticed I skipped the updates today because I don't have any updates, because I'm just getting into my new space and there's nothing happening because I'm just getting back into the swing of things. So next Wednesday, we'll be back with updates and another mini drop episode, and a full-length episode will be out this Friday. And I can't wait to continue offering you more content from the new Dharma Drops home studio. In the meantime, have a wonderful week, and I cannot wait to talk with you again. Bye, friends.